The ultrasound photo landed in our group chat at 11:47 on a Thursday morning. My wife Sarah, glowing in that hospital gown, her sister Emma holding her hand, and there in the corner, partially cropped but unmistakable, a man's watch I'd never seen before. Expensive. Silver links catching the fluorescent light. The caption read, "Baby Castellano coming March." I stared at my phone in the break room, coffee turning cold in my hand, and did the math I should have done months ago. We hadn't been intimate since last summer. Not once. The baby couldn't be mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is David Castellano, and I've spent 34 years being the guy who shows up. High school track star who never missed practice. College graduate who worked nights to finish debt-free. The husband who remembered anniversaries and fixed the dishwasher at midnight because nobody else would. I built a life on reliability, the kind of steady presence people take for granted until it's gone. That Thursday morning, staring at an ultrasound of a child that couldn't be mine, I realized being dependable had made me invisible. The break room smelled like burnt popcorn and industrial cleaner. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. But something fundamental cracked inside me, the way ice splits on a lake in early spring, silent at first, then all at once. I screenshotted the image, noting the timestamp, the location tag from Seattle Medical Center, the watch that didn't belong to me. Then I did what any man does when his foundation crumbles. I started building a new one. I walked back to my desk at the engineering firm where I'd worked for 8 years. My coworkers were debating lunch options, their voices a distant hum behind the ringing in my ears. I opened my laptop and began a spreadsheet. Column 1, dates. Column 2, events. Column 3, evidence. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, patient and relentless. I typed the first entry, August 15th, last intimacy. September 22nd, Sarah starts yoga classes, returns home later each week. October 10th, new lingerie in the laundry, tag still attached, never worn for me. November 3rd, password changed on her phone. I worked through lunch, my sandwich untouched, building a timeline of a marriage I'd been living alone. When I got home that evening, Sarah was in the kitchen making her specialty, lemon chicken that used to mean celebration. The house smelled like rosemary and lies. She turned when I walked in, her face bright with the kind of happiness that looked genuine if you didn't know what I knew. She'd put on one of those flowing dresses that hid what was growing underneath, soft fabric in a shade of blue that used to be my favorite. I set my keys on the counter with more care than necessary, each movement deliberate, buying time to choose my words. "Congratulations," I said. My voice came out level, almost friendly. She beamed, hands moving to her stomach in that protective gesture I'd seen in 1,000 movies but never expected to witness as a spectator in my own life. She started talking about nursery colors and baby names, her words tumbling over each other like water over stones, smooth and unstoppable. I let her talk. I nodded in the right places. I asked about her appointment, about the doctor's recommendations, about whether she'd told her mother yet. Every question was a fishing line cast into dark water, waiting to see what would surface. She told me everything except the truth. The doctor said the baby was healthy, developing right on schedule. They'd heard the heartbeat, strong and steady. Emma had cried, overwhelmed with joy at becoming an aunt. Sarah's mother was already planning a shower, talking about family heirlooms and traditions passed down through generations. Each detail was another brick in a wall I hadn't known she was building, separating her reality from mine. I stood there in our kitchen, in the home we'd bought together 3 years ago, and realized I was a stranger in my own story. That night, I waited until she fell asleep. Her breathing settled into the deep rhythm of someone without guilt, or perhaps someone who'd gotten so good at compartmentalizing that even sleep offered no confession. I took her phone from the nightstand, the one she'd started charging in the bathroom instead of beside the bed. I knew her passcode once. Now it was different, but I knew Sarah. I knew she'd use something meaningful, something that mattered to her. I tried her sister's birthday. Wrong. I tried our anniversary. Wrong. Then I tried something else, a hunch born from months of watching her pull away. I typed in 4 numbers that made my stomach turn. March, the month she'd announced in that group chat. The month this baby was due. The phone unlocked. The messages loaded like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to attend. Months of conversations with a contact saved simply as M. The early texts were careful, coded in the language of people who know they're doing wrong but haven't committed to stopping. Late-night exchanges about meetings that weren't on any calendar I could see. Compliments that crossed lines, then erased them, then crossed them again with more confidence. By September, the pretense had dissolved. I read words meant for someone else, promises and plans and intimate details that belonged in the marriage we'd supposedly been building together. I screenshotted everything, my thumb mechanical, my breathing controlled like I was running intervals on the track, measured inhales, purposeful exhales. Then I found the photos. Not the ones she'd shared in the group chat, sanitized for family consumption. The private collection she'd kept in a hidden album, password protected within her already locked phone, accessible only through a photo app I'd never heard of. Pictures from hotel rooms I'd never visited. A man's face I didn't recognize, handsome in that generic way of someone who spends too much time at the gym and not enough time developing character. More of that silver watch, this time wrapped around her waist as they posed in bathroom mirrors. Date stamps that corresponded with her yoga classes, her girls' nights out, her sister's supposed emergencies that required immediate attention. I saved every single image to a cloud account she didn't know I'd created. Then I put her phone back exactly where I'd found it, screen down, charging in the bathroom, and lay in the dark next to my pregnant wife, planning my exit strategy. Morning came with false sunshine. Sarah woke up cheerful, energized by the secret she thought she was keeping. She made coffee, humming that off-key melody she always hummed when she thought life was going her way. I showered longer than usual, letting hot water pound against my neck, washing away the urge to scream. When I emerged, she'd laid out breakfast, bagels and cream cheese, orange juice in the fancy glasses we saved for weekends. She talked about appointment schedules and what foods were making her nauseous, building a narrative where I was supposed to be the supportive husband, excited about a child I hadn't created. I played along. I asked the right questions. I offered to go to the next appointment. Her face flickered for just a moment, uncertainty crossing her features like a cloud over the sun, but she recovered quickly. That would be wonderful, she said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to include me without exposing what needed to stay hidden. I didn't push. I simply nodded, sipped my orange juice, and let her believe she was still in control of the story. Control is an illusion, and I was about to shatter hers. At work, I made 3 phone calls during my lunch break. The first was to a family law attorney named Patricia Hendricks, recommended by a college friend who'd been through his own divorce. Her voice was professional, efficient, the kind of tone that told me she'd heard worse stories than mine and had the wins to prove it. I gave her the basic outline, kept emotion out of it, focused on facts. She asked good questions, took notes I could hear clicking on her keyboard, and scheduled a consultation for that afternoon. No judgment, no platitudes, just strategic planning from someone who understood that marriages end and life continues. The second call was to my bank. I spoke with a manager I'd worked with when we'd bought the house, a woman named Gloria who remembered me because I'd brought her coffee during those long closing meetings. I explained that I needed to protect my assets during an upcoming separation. She didn't ask questions beyond what was legally necessary. Within an hour, I had a new personal account, my direct deposit rerouted, and limited Sarah's access to our joint account to prevent large withdrawals. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure I could still pay the mortgage after whatever came next. The third call was harder. I phoned my sister Rachel, the only family I had left after our parents died in a car accident 6 years ago. She was at her office in Portland, her voice bright until she heard mine. She knew something was catastrophically wrong before I said a word. Rachel had always been able to read me, even across state lines and cellular signals. I told her everything, the ultrasound, the timeline, the messages, the hidden photos. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence that felt like the pause before thunder. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You've always been the one who stays, David. But staying in the wrong place isn't loyalty. It's just expensive." Patricia's office was downtown, 23rd floor, with windows overlooking Puget Sound and mountains I couldn't name. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. We sat in a conference room that smelled like leather and old wood, and I laid out my evidence. The printed screenshots, the timeline spreadsheet, the bank records showing hotel charges on nights Sarah claimed to be at yoga. Patricia went through everything with the methodical precision of a surgeon, asking clarifying questions, making notes in the margins, occasionally nodding at particularly damning details. When she finished reviewing the materials, she leaned back in her chair and gave it to me straight. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Washington is a no-fault divorce state, which means the infidelity doesn't matter much legally, but the pregnancy changes things. If you're married when the baby is born, you're presumed to be the father under state law. That means financial responsibility unless we establish paternity immediately and contest it. She explained the process, the forms we'd need to file, the paternity test I could demand, the timeline we'd be working against. March was 5 months away. We had to move fast. I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since I'd first seen that ultrasound. What if he wants to be involved? What if this other man wants to claim the child? Patricia's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a recognition of complications beyond the legal playbook. "Then we deal with that when it happens," she said. "Right now, we focus on protecting you. We file for separation immediately, we document everything, and we make it clear that you are not accepting responsibility for a child that isn't biologically yours. The paperwork would be ready by morning. All I had to do was sign and serve Sarah with divorce papers before she could spin this into something else." I left Patricia's office as the sun was setting over the Sound, the sky turning shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I'd been in any state to appreciate beauty. I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at concrete and shadows. A part of me wanted to go home and pretend I'd never opened her phone, never made those calls, never started this avalanche that would bury everything we'd built. But that part was small and getting smaller. The louder voice, the one that sounded like my father, reminded me that some things can't be fixed. They can only be survived. I drove to a bar I'd never been to, a place far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I ordered a whiskey, neat, and sat in a corner booth under a neon sign advertising beer I didn't drink. The television over the bar played a basketball game nobody was watching. I thought about the man in those photos, the one with the expensive watch and the easy smile. I wondered if he knew about the baby. I wondered if Sarah had told him, if they'd made plans, if I was just the safety net they'd expected to catch them when their affair got complicated. I finished my drink and ordered another, not because I wanted to get drunk, but because I needed to sit somewhere that wasn't home, somewhere I could think without her voice in my head. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Where are you? Dinner is ready." I stared at the message, at the casual assumption that I'd come home like I always did, that nothing had changed, that the foundation of our marriage wasn't currently disintegrating beneath her feet. I typed back a lie as smooth as the ones she'd been feeding me. "Working late. Don't wait up." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. She was deciding how much to push, how much concern to perform. Finally, her response came. "Okay. Love you." I didn't reply. I turned my phone face down and ordered a third whiskey. The bartender was an older guy with a beard that had gone mostly gray and eyes that had seen too many men in my position. He didn't make conversation, didn't ask why I was drinking alone on a Thursday night, just kept my glass filled and my tab open. When I finally paid, and stood to leave, he looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Whatever you're dealing with," he said, "you'll get through it. Might not feel like it now, but you will." I nodded, left a generous tip, and walked out into the Seattle drizzle that had started while I was inside. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light was a delay, every green light passed too quickly. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagining how I'd confront her, what I'd say, how she'd react. Would she cry? Would she admit it? Would she try to convince me the baby was mine despite the math that said otherwise? Or would she do what people do when they're caught, spin stories and shift blame until I was somehow the villain in this tragedy she'd written? By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd played out a dozen scenarios, and none of them ended well. The house was dark except for the porch light and the glow from the living room. Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch, the television playing some home renovation show she liked to watch. She looked peaceful, one hand resting on her stomach, her face relaxed in sleep. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd married 5 years ago, the one who'd laughed at my terrible jokes and held my hand at my parents' funeral and promised we'd build something lasting together. Then I remembered the photos on her phone, the messages to them, the lies stacked so high they'd become her new reality. I turned off the television, left her sleeping where she was, and went upstairs to the guest room. I woke up at 5 in the morning, earlier than my alarm, with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've made an irreversible decision. I showered, dressed in a suit I usually saved for important client meetings, and made coffee strong enough to strip paint. By 6, I was at a print shop, picking up the divorce papers Patricia had filed electronically late last night. The clerk handed them over in a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should, pages that would legally end a marriage and start a war. I held them against my chest as I walked back to my truck, feeling the weight of words like irreconcilable differences and legal separation and petition for dissolution of marriage. I went to work early, before most of my coworkers arrived, and spent 2 hours reviewing a project that didn't need reviewing. I was buying time, delaying the inevitable, letting Sarah wake up alone in a house that was about to become a battlefield. At 9, I got a text. "Good morning. Doctor appointment is at 2 today. Still want to come?" The exclamation point felt like a weapon. The casual cheer felt like glass in my throat. I texted back a single word. "Yes." Then I called Patricia and told her I needed a process server at the house by noon. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said she'd make it happen. The process server was a woman named Kim, mid-50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a clipboard that looked like it had served 1,000 divorces. She met me 3 houses down from mine at 11:30, and I handed her the envelope along with a photo of Sarah so there'd be no confusion. She asked me one question. "Do you want to be there when I serve her?" I thought about it. Thought about seeing Sarah's face when she realized what was happening. Thought about the accusations that would follow, the tears, the rage. I shook my head. "No. I need to not be there." Kim nodded like she'd expected that answer and told me she'd call when it was done. I drove to a park near the hospital where Sarah's appointment would be, a place with walking trails and a view of the water. I sat on a bench and watched joggers pass, people living their normal lives, unburdened by the knowledge that the person they trusted most had built a second life in the shadows. My phone rang at 12:18. Kim's voice was professional, matter-of-fact. "It's done." She was surprised but took the papers. No drama. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat with the finality of it. There was no going back now. Whatever happened next would happen without my permission. At 1:45, my phone exploded. Sarah called 6 times in 3 minutes. I didn't answer. Then the texts started, a flood of messages that went from confused to angry to desperate. "What is this? You can't be serious. We need to talk. David, answer your phone. This is insane. Call me right now." Each message was a punctuation mark on a sentence I'd already finished writing. I turned my phone to silent and drove to the hospital, parking in the lot where I could see the entrance but remain unseen. I wanted to know if she'd still go to the appointment. I wanted to see if he would show up. She arrived at 1:58, rushing through the main doors with her sister Emma beside her. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her posture, the way she kept checking her phone, the way Emma's hand stayed on her shoulder like an anchor. They disappeared inside, and I waited. 2 minutes later, a Mercedes pulled into a spot near the entrance. Silver, expensive, the kind of car that announced its owner's success. The driver got out, and I recognized him from the photos. Tall, athletic build, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. He checked his watch, that same silver watch, and walked toward the entrance with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. I sat in my truck with my hands gripping the steering wheel and something dark unfurling in my chest. This was M. This was the man who'd been sleeping with my wife, who'd gotten her pregnant, who'd been living a parallel life while I fixed dishwashers and remembered anniversaries. I watched him disappear through those doors, and for the first time since this started, I felt something besides shock. I felt rage. Not the explosive kind that makes men do stupid things. The cold kind. The kind that plans and waits and executes with precision. I started my truck and drove away before I could do something that would cost me more than this marriage already had. Patricia called while I was driving. Sarah's trying to reach you through my office. She's claiming this is a misunderstanding, that you've made a terrible mistake. I asked Patricia what she'd told her. The truth, Patricia said. That you have irrefutable evidence of infidelity and that you're not claiming paternity of the child. There was a pause. She didn't take it well. I could imagine. Sarah was used to controlling narratives, to being the reasonable one, the victim when convenient, the hero when necessary. This didn't fit her script. Good, I said. Let her be uncomfortable. Patricia's voice carried a note of approval. I'll file the paternity contestation paperwork today. In the meantime, don't engage with her directly. Everything goes through me. I went back to work and threw myself into a project that needed finishing. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, more focused, but nobody asked questions. In this business, people respected the walls you put up. I worked through lunch, through the afternoon coffee break, through the usual end-of-day chatter about weekend plans. At 6, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. David, this is Marcus Webb. We need to talk. I stared at the message, at the name I'd seen in Sarah's phone contacts saved simply as M. He tracked down my number somehow, probably through Sarah, and now he wanted to talk. I blocked the number without responding. Whatever he had to say could go through lawyers. That night, I stopped at a storage facility on the way home. I'd rented a unit that afternoon, 10 by 10, climate-controlled, the kind of space people use when they're between lives. I'd spent my lunch break packing boxes at the house, taking what mattered, clothes, documents, photos from before the marriage, my father's tools, my mother's cookbook, things that belonged to the life I'd had before Sarah rewrote it. I loaded everything into the unit, stacking boxes with the same methodical care I brought to engineering projects. Each box was labeled. Each item accounted for. When I finished, I stood in the doorway looking at the organized remains of my old life, and I didn't feel sad. I felt efficient. The house was empty when I got there. Sarah's car was gone, which meant she was probably at her sister's, regrouping, planning her counterattack. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt too large, too quiet, echoing with the absence of the future we'd supposedly been building. I made a sandwich I didn't eat. I turned on the television and watched nothing. At 11, I went upstairs to the guest room where I'd been sleeping and lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, a structure that would soon belong to neither of us. Sleep was slow coming, and when it arrived, it brought dreams of running. Not away from anything. Just running the way I used to in high school, long distances on empty roads, the rhythm of breath and footfall, the simplicity of forward motion. I woke at dawn feeling more rested than I had in months, as if my subconscious had given me permission to move on. I showered, dressed, made coffee that actually tasted good for once. My phone had 17 missed calls from Sarah and 4 from unknown numbers that were probably Marcus trying different approaches. I deleted the voicemails without listening and started my day. Patricia called at 9 with an update. Sarah's hired an attorney. Martin Chase. He's good, aggressive, expensive. They're going to fight the paternity contestation, claim you're the father regardless of the biology. I felt my jaw tighten. Can they do that? Legally, they can try, Patricia said. Washington presumes the husband is the father if the child is born during the marriage. But we have the timeline, the evidence of her affair, and we can demand a paternity test immediately after birth. They're betting you'll cave before it gets that far. They're betting wrong, I said. Patricia's laugh was short and sharp. That's what I told Martin. He didn't like it. The next few days moved like a chess game played through lawyers. Sarah's attorney sent demands for reconciliation counseling, for me to attend prenatal appointments, for me to acknowledge my responsibilities as a husband and soon-to-be father. Patricia countered every move with evidence, with timelines, with the indisputable fact that I hadn't touched my wife in 8 months. They pushed. We pushed back. The law moved slowly, but my resolve didn't waver. I showed up to work, completed my projects, went home to an empty house, and slept better than I had in years. 2 weeks after I'd served the papers, my sister Rachel flew in from Portland. She appeared at my door on a Friday evening with a duffel bag and a bottle of bourbon that looked serious about its job. She didn't ask permission to stay. She just walked in, assessed the emptiness of the house, and declared we were going out. I started to protest, but she cut me off with a look that reminded me of our mother. "You've been a monk long enough," she said. "Tonight, we're going to a place with music and people who don't know your story. You're going to remember what it feels like to be human." We ended up at a bar in Belltown, the kind of place where the music was loud enough to drown thoughts and the crowd was young enough to make me feel ancient. Rachel ordered drinks and pulled me onto the floor when a band started playing covers of songs from our childhood. I felt ridiculous at first, too old, too tired, too weighed down by the rubble of my marriage. But Rachel was relentless, and after the second song, something loosened in my chest. I wasn't dancing well. I was just moving, letting the rhythm make decisions for me, and it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. Between sets, we found a table in the back. Rachel studied me with the intensity of someone who'd known me my entire life and could still read the parts one tried to hide. "You're handling this better than I expected," she said. I shrugged. "What's the alternative? Fall apart?" She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Most people would. Most people would be calling her, fighting to save it, convincing themselves that love can overcome anything. You're not most people. I took a drink, felt the burn, let it ground me. I loved her, Rachel. I really did. But I loved a version of her that doesn't exist. Maybe never existed. That's not something you can save. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Mom and Dad would be proud of you. Not because your marriage ended, but because you're not letting it end you." We sat in that moment, in the noise and the crowd, two siblings who'd survived worse losses than divorce. Our parents' death had taught us that life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just keeps moving, and you either move with it or get left behind. I wasn't going to be left behind. Not this time. The music started again, something faster, and Rachel dragged me back to the floor. This time, I didn't resist. I let the noise and the movement carry me somewhere beyond the spreadsheets and the legal documents and the careful control I'd been maintaining for weeks. For 3 hours, I wasn't David Castellano, husband in the middle of a divorce, man raising questions about paternity. I was just someone moving through space, taking up room in the world, refusing to shrink. When we finally left, the Seattle night was cold and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Rachel looped her arm through mine as we walked to my truck. "That's the David I remember," she said. "Don't lose him again." The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy that felt foreign. Rachel and I hiked Discovery Park, ate overpriced brunch, watched movies that didn't require thinking. She left Sunday evening with a hug that lasted longer than usual and a promise to check in daily. The house felt bigger after she left, but not emptier. There's a difference between alone and lonely, and I was learning to tell them apart. I made dinner for one, cleaned up after myself, went to bed at a reasonable hour. The guest room was starting to feel less like exile and more like territory I'd claimed for myself. Monday brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Patricia called during my morning coffee with news delivered in her trademark efficiency. Marcus called this paternity test before the baby is born. They want to settle this now. I felt my pulse kick up. Can we do that? Yes, Patricia said. There's a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. They take Sarah's blood, analyze fetal DNA, compare it to yours. It's safe, accurate, and available as early as 8 weeks. Sarah is well past that. I set down my coffee cup, my hand steadier than it had any right to be. Set it up. If Marcus Webb wants the truth, let's give it to him. The test was scheduled for the following week at a medical facility downtown. Patricia arranged everything, made it clear that I wouldn't have to see Sarah, that we'd be in separate rooms, that this was purely procedural. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from the strange calm that comes from knowing you're about to prove something you've known all along. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what would happen when the results came back. Would Sarah finally admit it? Would Marcus step up or disappear? Would any of this make the betrayal hurt less? The facility was sterile and efficient, all white walls and fluorescent lights and paperwork that reduced human drama to checkboxes. A nurse took my blood sample with practiced ease, labeled the vials with my name and a case number that made this feel less like my life and more like evidence in someone else's story. The whole process took 15 minutes. I was in and out before I could think too hard about what I was doing. Patricia met me in the parking lot afterward, her expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. Results in 7 to 10 business days, she said. Then we'll know for certain. I nodded. I already knew. This was just making it official. While waiting for the results, life developed a strange rhythm. I worked, I went to the gym, I started running again for the first time since college. Every morning before dawn, I'd lace up my shoes and hit the Burt Gilman Trail, pushing my body until my lungs burned and my legs ached and the noise in my head quieted to something manageable. Running gave me back something I'd lost, a sense of control over my own movement, my own direction, my own pace. Nobody could take that from me. Not Sarah, not Marcus, not the lawyers reshaping my life in language I barely understood. 10 days after the test, Patricia called. I was in a meeting, reviewing structural plans for a new office building downtown, when my phone buzzed. I excused myself and took the call in the hallway, my heart doing something irregular against my ribs. I have the results, Patricia said. Do you want to hear them over the phone or come to my office? Tell me now, I said. There was a pause, the kind that stretches seconds into hours. David, you're not the father. The probability of paternity is 0%. Marcus Webb is the biological father. 99.97% certainty. I stood in that hallway with my phone pressed to my ear and felt the last thread of uncertainty snap. Some part of me, despite all the evidence, had held on to the microscopic possibility that I was wrong. That the timeline was off. That somehow, impossibly, this child was mine and everything else was a misunderstanding I'd blown out of proportion. That thread was gone now, severed by science and certified by a lab that didn't care about my feelings. You still there? Patricia asked. I'm here, I said. What happens now? Now, she said, we file an amended petition. We formally contest paternity, we remove any legal obligation for you regarding this child, and we move forward with the divorce. Martin's not going to like this. I don't care what Martin likes, I said. I care about the truth. The results changed everything and nothing. Legally, they gave me leverage, removed the presumption of paternity, freed me from financial responsibility for a child that wasn't mine. Emotionally, they confirmed what I already knew but made it real in a way that photographs and timelines couldn't. There was a baby coming, and it wasn't mine, and Sarah had been willing to let me believe it was. That level of deception required planning, commitment, a willingness to build a life on lies so fundamental that truth became the enemy. I sat with that knowledge and felt something shift in my chest, not grief anymore, but something cleaner. Acceptance. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since this started. I called Sarah. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because she deserved to know the results before her lawyer did. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, her voice tentative, hopeful in a way that made my stomach turn. David? I kept my tone neutral, factual. The paternity results came back. I'm not the father. Marcus is. There was silence so complete I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick. Sarah, I said, just so we're clear, I'm not raising another man's child. Whatever arrangement you and Marcus work out is between you and him. I'm done. She started to say something, but I ended the call before the words could land. Some conversations don't need finishing. Within an hour, my phone was ringing again. Not Sarah this time, but the number I'd blocked weeks ago. Marcus Webb. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what he'd say now that there was no hiding, no ambiguity, no room for the story to be anything other than what it was. I answered without greeting. David, his voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone used to talking his way out of problems. We should meet. Face to face. Man to man. I laughed, a sound without humor. You think you and I are men in the same category? You slept with my wife, got her pregnant, and hid like a coward. There's nothing for us to discuss. He tried again, his tone shifting to something that might have been sincerity if I'd been inclined to believe it. Look, this situation is complicated for everyone. Sarah and we didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. And now there's a child involved. I need to know what you're planning to do. I felt that cold rage again, the kind that doesn't scream but calculates. What I'm planning to do, Marcus, is divorce my wife, walk away with my dignity intact, and let you handle the consequences of your actions. That child is your responsibility, not mine. Figure it out. His voice hardened. You're just going to abandon her? Leave her to deal with this alone? The irony was rich enough to choke on. I didn't abandon anyone, I said. Sarah made her choices. You made yours. Now live with them. And Marcus, one more thing. Don't call me again. If you need to reach me, go through my attorney. Then I hung up and blocked the number permanently. The next morning, Patricia called with an update that made the situation clearer and messier at the same time. Martin called me this morning. He's withdrawing from the case. Apparently, Sarah can't afford his fees, and Marcus isn't offering to help financially. She's going to have to find new representation or represent herself. There was satisfaction in Patricia's voice, the kind that comes from watching an opponent's strategy collapse. This works in our favor, David. The longer she goes without proper counsel, the more ground we gain. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Keep pushing, I said. I want this finished before that baby is born. Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings accelerated. Sarah, now representing herself, made mistakes that a competent attorney would have avoided. She missed filing deadlines. She submitted documents with errors. She showed up to hearings unprepared, emotional, playing the victim in front of a judge who'd seen it all before and wasn't impressed. The divorce moved through the system like water finding cracks in concrete, slow but inevitable. Every week brought new paperwork, new hearings, new evidence of how thoroughly Sarah had dismantled what we'd built. Patricia was relentless, documenting every missed payment Sarah made on the credit cards I'd removed her from, every desperate text message she sent asking for money, every attempt she made to paint me as the villain in a story where she'd written every betrayal herself. I stopped checking Sarah's social media after the first few posts. She'd crafted a narrative for public consumption, the abandoned pregnant wife, the husband who walked away in her time of need, the cruel man who wouldn't step up for an innocent child. Her friends rallied with heart emojis and supportive comments that didn't know the full story. I could have corrected the record. I could have posted the evidence, the timeline, the paternity results. But Patricia advised against it, and I agreed. The truth didn't need an audience. It just needed to be true. In mid-December, 3 months after I'd served the papers, I got a call from Rachel. She'd been tracking the situation from Portland, checking in daily, making sure I was eating and sleeping and not retreating into the kind of isolation that turns men bitter. Her voice on the phone was different that day, excited in a way I hadn't heard since before our parents died. "I'm getting married," she said. "Next summer. And I need my brother there as best man." I felt something warm push through the numbness I'd been carrying. "That's incredible, Rach. Tell me about him." His name was Thomas, a college professor she'd met at a conference 6 months ago. They'd taken it slow, built something on honesty and shared interests and the kind of communication I'd thought existed in my own marriage. Rachel talked about him with a lightness that made me realize how heavy my own relationship had been, how much effort I'd put into maintaining something that Sarah had already decided to abandon. When she finished telling me about the proposal, about the ring he'd designed himself, about their plans for a small ceremony on the coast, she paused. "You're going to find this again, David. Someone who chooses you every day. Someone who doesn't make you wonder." I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days, sitting alone in a house that echoed with absence, I wondered if trust was something you could only spend once. If after Sarah, after watching someone I'd loved construct an entire alternate life in the spaces between my awareness, I'd ever be able to let anyone that close again. But I didn't tell Rachel that. I told her I was happy for her, that I couldn't wait to meet Thomas, that I'd start working on my best man speech. When we hung up, I sat in the silence and let myself feel both things at once, happiness for my sister and grief for myself. Christmas came and went in a blur of polite family obligations. I spent it with distant cousins in Spokane, people who knew about the divorce in abstract terms but didn't pry for details. We ate ham and exchanged practical gifts and watched football games that didn't matter. It was fine. Fine in the way that things are when you're just trying to get through them without breaking. I called Rachel on Christmas Eve, and she told me Sarah had reached out to her on Facebook, asking if Rachel could talk sense into me, convince me to reconsider, help me see that families forgive and move forward. Rachel had blocked her without responding. January brought a cold snap that froze Seattle solid for a week. Pipes burst across the city. Power lines sagged under ice. I spent my evenings reinforcing the house against the cold, not because I planned to stay there long term, but because maintaining things was the only control I had left. I insulated pipes, sealed drafts, kept the heat running at levels that would prevent damage. The house wasn't mine anymore in any way that mattered, but I wasn't going to let it fall apart on my watch. Patricia called on a Tuesday afternoon in late January with news that shifted the entire landscape. Marcus Webb filed for custody. He wants joint legal and physical custody of the child once it's born. She sounded surprised, which was rare for her. I thought he'd disappear once the money got real. Apparently, I was wrong. I processed this information while staring at structural drawings that suddenly seemed less important than they had 5 minutes ago. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "Nothing directly," Patricia said. "You're not the father. You have no legal standing regarding this child. But it means Sarah's going to be dealing with custody battles and co-parenting arrangements with a man she probably thought would vanish. It's going to get messy." I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Marcus wasn't abandoning his responsibility. Vindication that Sarah would have to navigate the consequences of her choices without me as a safety net. And something else, something smaller and less noble, satisfaction that the fantasy she'd been living was colliding hard with reality. "Is this going to slow down our divorce?" I asked. "No," Patricia said. "If anything, it might speed things up. Sarah's going to be focused on Marcus now. She doesn't have the resources to fight on 2 fronts." The prediction proved accurate. In February, 3 weeks before Sarah's due date, we reached a settlement. The house would be sold, profits split evenly after the mortgage was paid. Our retirement accounts would be divided according to state law. I'd keep my truck and my tools and my personal belongings. She'd keep her car and whatever she'd managed to salvage from our joint accounts before I'd locked them down. No alimony, since we'd been married less than 10 years and she had earning capacity. No child support, since the child wasn't mine. It was clean, efficient, the kind of ending that looks simple on paper but costs everything in practice. I signed the papers in Patricia's office on a gray afternoon that matched my mood. Her pen made scratching sounds against the signature lines, finalizing what Sarah's choices had started months ago. When it was done, Patricia shook my hand with genuine warmth. "You handled this better than most men would have," she said. "You should be proud of yourself." I wasn't sure about proud, but I was sure about finished. The marriage was over in every way that mattered. All that remained was the final decree from a judge who'd never met us and didn't care about our story. 2 days later, Sarah went into labor. I knew because Emma called me, hysterical, begging me to come to the hospital. "Sarah's asking for you," she said through tears. "She needs you there. Please, David. For old time's sake." I sat in my truck in the work parking lot and felt that old tug, the instinct to show up, to be the reliable one, to set aside my own hurt for someone else's need. Then I remembered the photos, the messages, the casual cruelty of letting me believe a lie for months. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not her husband anymore, Emma. I'm not that baby's father. Marcus is there. He can support her." Emma started to argue, but I ended the call. The guilt lingered for about an hour. Then my phone lit up with a message from Marcus. "She's asking for you. I know things are complicated, but she's scared and she's in pain. Could you at least call her?" I stared at the message, at the audacity of the man who'd slept with my wife asking me to provide emotional support during the birth of his child. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I settled on something simple. "No." Then I turned off my phone and went back to work. The baby was born that evening. A girl, 7 pounds, healthy, named Claire. I learned this from Rachel, who'd apparently been monitoring the situation through mutual friends. She sent me a text that was just facts, no emotion, giving me the information without expecting a response. I read it, acknowledged it with a thumbs up, and went for a run that pushed me harder than I'd pushed myself in months. When I got home, sweating and exhausted and feeling something close to clean, I took a shower that lasted until the water ran cold. The final divorce decree came through in early March, 1 week after Claire was born. Patricia had it messengered to my office, the official document that said Sarah Elizabeth Morrison was no longer Sarah Elizabeth Castellano, that our marriage had been dissolved, that we were legally separate people again. I read through the legalese, the findings of fact, the distribution of assets, the notation that there were no children of the marriage. That last part hit differently, knowing there was a child, just not mine, never mine, and I'd been right to walk away. I took the decree home and filed it in a folder I'd labeled Finished Business. Then I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for no particular occasion and sat on my back porch watching the last light drain from the sky. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic and someone's dog barking 3 houses down. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't mourning. I was just sitting with the weight of what had ended and the uncertainty of what came next. The wine was good. The evening was cold. Life continued regardless of how I felt about it. The house sold faster than expected. A young couple with a baby on the way, ironically enough, made an offer above asking within 3 days of listing. They loved the kitchen I'd renovated, the yard I'd maintained, the garage where I'd organized everything with labels and pegboards, and the kind of care that makes a space functional. I signed the acceptance paperwork without emotion, watching my home become someone else's new beginning. The closing was set for mid-April. I had 6 weeks to find somewhere else to live. I spent my lunch breaks looking at apartments, small efficient spaces that required no maintenance and came with no memories. 1-bedroom units with mountain views or water views or no views at all. Places that were just shelter, just walls and a door that locked, nothing more. I toured a dozen buildings, nodded at amenities I'd never use, asked questions about lease terms and pet policies even though I had no pets. Every space felt temporary, like a hotel room I'd be leaving soon, and maybe that was the point. Maybe I needed temporary while I figured out what permanent looked like now. I settled on a place in Fremont, 8th floor, corner unit, with windows that let in more light than I needed but less than I deserved. It was modern and cold and utterly impersonal, exactly what I wanted. I signed a year lease, put down first and last month's rent, and scheduled the move for the weekend after closing. Rachel offered to fly out and help, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone, the physical act of leaving, of boxing up what remained, of walking out of a house that had been home and closing the door knowing I'd never open it again. The week before the move, I did something I hadn't done since the divorce started. I went to the cemetery where my parents were buried. Their headstones sat side by side under an oak tree that had probably been there longer than I'd been alive. I brought flowers that seemed inadequate and words that seemed worse. I told them about Sarah, about the baby that wasn't mine, about the marriage that had failed in ways I still didn't fully understand. I told them I was trying to be the man they'd raised, steady and honest and resilient. I told them I missed them in ways that had nothing to do with the divorce and everything to do with wanting parents who could tell me I'd be okay. The wind moved through the oak branches, and somewhere a bird sang something that sounded hopeful. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, feeling the spring cold seep through my jacket, and let myself cry for the first time since that ultrasound photo had landed in the group chat. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that felt like pressure releasing from somewhere deep. When I was finished, I wiped my face, touched each headstone once, and walked back to my truck. The crying had helped. Not fixed anything, but helped. Sometimes that's enough. Moving day was warm and clear, the kind of Seattle spring day that makes people forget about the 9 months of rain. I rented a truck, loaded it with the boxes I'd been accumulating in the storage unit, and made 3 trips between the old house and the new apartment. By evening, everything I owned was stacked in rooms that smelled like new carpet and fresh paint. I ordered pizza, assembled my bed, and slept that first night on sheets that had never been in the house I'd shared with Sarah. The mattress was different. The pillows were new. Even the darkness felt cleaner. The apartment became a project. I hung pictures on the walls, set up my small home office in the second bedroom that was really just a large closet, arranged my furniture in configurations that made sense for one person living alone. I bought plants because Rachel said it would help, succulents that supposedly couldn't die even with my level of attention. I established routines, coffee at dawn, gym before work, dinner cooked rather than ordered, reading before bed. The routines built structure where chaos had been, gave me a framework to hang my days on. Work became something more than just a paycheck. I took on a lead role for a new commercial development downtown, managing a team of engineers and contractors on a project that would take 2 years to complete. The responsibility was intense, demanding hours that bled into evenings and weekends, but I welcomed it. Being needed professionally filled some of the space that personal connection had left empty. My boss noticed the shift, pulled me aside one day to tell me I was doing exceptional work, and hinted at a promotion that might come at year's end. In May, Rachel came to visit. She brought Thomas, and I took them to dinner at a seafood place on the waterfront where the halibut was perfect and the conversation flowed easier than I'd expected. Thomas was good, smart and funny and clearly devoted to my sister in ways that made me both happy and envious. He asked about my work, about Seattle, about my plans for the future, normal questions that didn't probe the divorce wounds. Rachel watched me carefully throughout the meal, checking for signs that I was faking okay rather than living it. By dessert, she seemed satisfied that I was genuinely functioning. After dinner, we walked along the pier, watching tourists and locals blend into the evening crowd. Rachel looped her arm through mine the way she'd done since we were kids. "You seem different," she said. "Lighter." I considered this, watching ferries cross the dark water, their lights reflecting like promises kept. "I feel different," I admitted. Like I survived something I wasn't sure I would. She squeezed my arm. That's because you did. Most people don't walk away from that kind of betrayal without becoming bitter. You just became more yourself. June brought news from Patricia, forwarded without comment. Sarah and Marcus were in court fighting over custody of Claire. He wanted 50-50 time. She wanted primary custody with him having every other weekend. The baby was 3 months old, and already her parents were at war over who got to shape her life. Patricia's email ended with a simple line, "Glad you're not in the middle of this." I read it twice, felt a wave of relief so profound it was almost physical, and deleted the message. That was their life now. Not mine. Not anymore. I started dating in July, not seriously, just coffee meetings with women I matched with on apps Rachel had insisted I download. The dates were fine, pleasant conversations that went nowhere, both of us performing interest while knowing nothing would come of it. I wasn't ready, and most of them could sense it, the walls I'd built that made real connection impossible. After the 5th coffee that ended with polite goodbyes and no second date, I deleted the apps and decided to focus on myself for a while longer. Forcing connection felt worse than being alone. My 35th birthday passed quietly in August. Rachel sent a care package with my favorite snacks and a card that made me laugh. Thomas included a book on Stoic philosophy with a note that said, "For when life requires perspective." I spent the evening on my apartment balcony, reading Marcus Aurelius and drinking bourbon that tasted like acceptance. The city spread out below me, lights coming on as dusk settled, millions of people living their own complicated stories. Mine was just one among many, not special, not tragic, just human. In September, exactly 1 year after that ultrasound photo had appeared in my phone, I did something impulsive. I booked a flight to Iceland, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had put off because Sarah had never been interested. I took a week of vacation, packed a bag with hiking gear and cameras, and flew to Reykjavik with no itinerary beyond seeing the northern lights and driving the ring road. It was the first purely selfish thing I'd done in years, choosing something just because I wanted it, not because it served anyone else's agenda. Iceland was cold and stark and beautiful in ways that didn't require explanation. I hiked across lava fields that looked like the surface of another planet. I soaked in hot springs while snow fell around me. I drove through landscapes so empty and vast they made my problems feel appropriately small. On the 3rd night, I saw the aurora, green ribbons dancing across a sky so full of stars I couldn't find familiar constellations. I stood in the freezing dark and felt something shift, not happiness exactly, but the possibility of it, a door opening to a future I couldn't yet see but knew was there. I took hundreds of photos on that trip, not for social media or to prove I'd been there, but because beauty deserved documentation. When I got home, I had the best ones printed and framed, hung them in my apartment as evidence that life continued, that there were experiences worth having even alone, maybe especially alone. Rachel called the day after I returned, eager to hear about the trip. I told her about the glaciers and the waterfalls and the horses with their strange gaits. I didn't tell her about standing under the northern lights and feeling my marriage finally, truly end. Some moments are too private for words. October brought an unexpected message. Emma, Sarah's sister, reached out asking if we could meet for coffee. I almost declined, not wanting to be pulled back into their drama, but curiosity won. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us had history with. Emma looked tired, older than her 32 years, worn down by something more than just lack of sleep. She apologized immediately for calling me during the labor, said she understood now why I'd refused, admitted that Sarah had manipulated the situation more than Emma had realized at the time. What she told me over the next hour filled in gaps I hadn't known existed. Sarah and Marcus had broken up 2 months after Claire was born. He'd been present for the birth, excited about fatherhood, committed to co-parenting. Then reality hit. The sleepless nights, the constant needs, the expense, the way a baby rewrites every plan you thought you had. He'd started missing his scheduled time, showing up late, making excuses. By Claire's 2-month birthday, he'd ghosted completely, stopped answering calls, moved to California for a job opportunity, sent child support checks but no presence, no involvement, No fathering beyond financial obligation. Sarah was drowning, Emma said. Living with their mother, working part-time, trying to manage a baby alone while processing that both her marriage and her affair had ended in abandonment. Emma wasn't asking me to help. She was just telling me, giving me the epilogue to a story I'd walked out of. She wanted me to know that I'd been right, that the fantasy Sarah had chased had collapsed exactly as badly as anyone with sense could have predicted. I'm sorry, Emma said again. For all of it. For not seeing what she was doing to you. For taking her side when she was clearly wrong. I accepted the apology with more grace than I felt. Some part of me wanted to say I told you so, wanted to point out that consequences had arrived exactly on schedule. But Emma looked miserable enough without me adding to it. We finished our coffee talking about other things, her new job, Rachel's wedding plans, the Seahawks' disappointing season. When we parted, she hugged me briefly and thanked me for meeting her. I watched her walk to her car, shoulders slumped under weight that wasn't hers to carry, and felt grateful all over again that I'd walked away when I did. November was gray and wet, classic Seattle weather that matched the anniversary I was trying not to acknowledge. 1 year since I'd served divorce papers. 1 year since I'd stopped believing in the version of my life I'd been living. I marked it privately, no ceremony, just awareness that I'd survived 12 months that had reshaped everything. I was still standing. Still working. Still functioning. That felt like enough. Rachel's wedding was scheduled for June, 8 months away, and she'd started sending me details about tuxedo fittings and bachelor party ideas and the cabin she'd rented on the Oregon coast for the ceremony. Her enthusiasm was infectious, reminded me that love didn't always end in betrayal, that some people found partners who chose them consistently, who didn't build second lives in shadows. I threw myself into best man duties, helped plan the bachelor party, wrote and rewrote my speech until it captured what I wanted to say about loyalty and choosing well and the kind of love that doesn't require detective work. December brought the holidays again, and this time I handled them differently. I volunteered at a homeless shelter on Christmas Eve, serving meals to people whose problems made mine look manageable. I spent Christmas Day with Rachel and Thomas in Portland, eating too much and laughing at stories from our childhood that had gotten funnier with time. It was good, genuinely good, not the performance of okay but actual contentment. When I drove back to Seattle the day after Christmas, I felt something close to peace. The year ended quietly. I stood on my balcony on New Year's Eve, watching fireworks burst over the Space Needle, counting down with a city full of strangers. When midnight arrived, I raised my glass to the skyline and made a private toast. To surviving. To learning. To whatever comes next. The bourbon was smooth. The night was cold. The new year stretched ahead, uncertain but mine, completely and entirely mine. I'd earned that freedom the hard way, and I wasn't taking it for granted. January brought a promotion at work, the one my boss had hinted at months earlier. Senior project manager, meaningful raise, my own office with a door that closed. I accepted with gratitude that felt earned, not lucky. I'd worked for this, had thrown myself into projects when my personal life was ashes, had proven I could deliver even when everything else was falling apart. The recognition mattered, validation that I was building something solid even if it was just a career. February was routine and satisfying, the kind of month where nothing dramatic happens but everything feels stable. I established new friendships with colleagues, started playing pickup basketball on Thursday nights, joined a book club that met monthly in a bar basement. These weren't deep connections yet, but they were connections, threads of social fabric I was weaving to replace what the divorce had torn. I was learning to be alone without being lonely, learning that a full life doesn't require a partner if you're intentional about building it. In March, 16 months after that initial text message, I did something I had been avoiding. I drove past the old house, the one Sarah and I had bought together, the one the young couple with the baby had purchased. It looked different, new paint on the door, different curtains in the windows, a tricycle on the lawn. The life I'd built there had been completely erased, replaced by someone else's beginning. I felt nothing looking at it, no nostalgia, no regret, just acknowledgement that this building had once meant something and now didn't. I drove away without stopping, without taking photos, without marking the moment as anything significant. Spring arrived early that year, cherry blossoms blooming in late March instead of April. The city transformed into something hopeful, color returning after months of gray. I started hiking again, real hikes in the Cascades, pushing myself up trails that required endurance and rewarded with views that made the climb worthwhile. I went alone, finding satisfaction in self-reliance, in navigating maps and weather and terrain without needing anyone else's input. These solo adventures became my therapy, cheaper than counseling and more effective, at least for me. In April, I got a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, assuming spam or wrong number. But something made me open it. David, this is Marcus Webb. I know I have no right to reach out, but I need to say something. I've been a coward. I abandoned my daughter and left Sarah to handle consequences that were my responsibility too. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just wanted you to know I'm stepping up now. Moving back to Seattle. Filing for custody. Trying to be the father Claire deserves. I thought you should know since this might bring up old wounds. I'm sorry for my part in hurting you. I read the message 3 times, processing the apology I'd never expected to receive. Part of me wanted to respond with anger, with all the things I'd wanted to say when he'd called during the labor. But the anger had cooled, had burned itself out over months of moving forward. I typed a response that felt true. Marcus, what you did to your daughter is between you and her. What you did to me is done and over. I hope you're genuine about stepping up. Claire deserves a father who shows up. Don't contact me again. Then I blocked the number, not out of anger but out of finality. May brought an invitation I hadn't expected. Sarah's mother reached out through Facebook, asking if I'd be willing to meet for lunch. She apologized for the intrusion, said she understood if I declined, but had things she wanted to say that she felt I deserved to hear. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a restaurant halfway between Seattle and Tacoma, neutral ground where neither of us had history. She looked older than I remembered, grief and stress aging her in ways that made me feel sorry despite everything. She apologized for believing Sarah's version of events, for not questioning the timeline, for the harsh words she'd said to me in the courthouse parking lot. She told me she'd learn the full truth gradually, pieces revealed over months as Sarah's defenses crumbled and reality became impossible to deny. She wanted me to know that she knew I'd been wronged, that I'd handled the situation with more grace than most men would have managed, that she respected me for walking away rather than letting myself be used. It was closure I hadn't known I needed, validation from someone who'd been in Sarah's corner, but had since switched sides based on evidence rather than loyalty. Before we parted, she asked me one question. Do you hate her? I considered this carefully, wanting to answer honestly. No, I said finally. I don't hate her. I don't really feel anything about her anymore. She made choices that destroyed our marriage, and she's living with those consequences. That's enough for me. Sarah's mother nodded, tears in her eyes. That's more than she deserves, she said. Your kindness, I mean. Most men would want revenge. I shrugged. Revenge is exhausting. Moving forward is easier. Rachel's wedding approached like a beacon, something positive to focus on as spring turned to summer. The bachelor party in late May was exactly what I needed, a weekend in Bend with Thomas's college friends, guys who drank beer and told stories and treated me like I'd always been part of their group. We rafted the Deschutes, hiked Smith Rock, sat around a fire telling lies that got bigger with each round. Nobody asked about my divorce. Nobody treated me like I was broken. For 3 days, I was just David, Rachel's brother, Thomas's new friend, a guy who could laugh and drink and be present without carrying the weight of the past year and a half. The wedding itself was perfect in its imperfection. The ceremony on the Oregon coast, wind whipping Rachel's veil, Thomas's voice cracking when he said his vows, me standing beside him as best man, watching my sister marry someone who deserved her. My speech went well, made people laugh and cry in equal measure, talked about choosing partners who choose you back, about building lives on honesty rather than hope. Rachel hugged me after, whispered thank you in my ear, told me she was proud of the man I'd become through all this. I believed her. At the reception, I danced with Rachel for the traditional brother-sister dance, spun her around to a Jack Johnson song she'd loved since high school. She looked happy, genuinely, completely happy, and I felt grateful that at least one of us had found what love was supposed to look like. Later, sitting at a table with Thomas's friends, slightly drunk on champagne and sentiment, one of them asked if I was seeing anyone. Not yet, I said. But I'm getting there. It felt true when I said it. June ended with me back in Seattle, back in my routine, but something had shifted. The wedding had reminded me that good things still happened, that not all love stories ended in betrayal, that happiness was possible if you chose the right person. I wasn't ready to actively pursue that yet, but the defensive walls I'd built had lowered slightly. I could see over them now, could imagine a future that included someone else, even if that someone was still theoretical. July brought heat and clarity. I spent the 4th of July weekend on the San Juan Islands, kayaking through channels that mirrored skies so perfectly I couldn't tell where water ended and air began. I camped alone, cooked meals over a portable stove, read books that had nothing to do with self-help or recovery. It was vacation in its purest form, rest without agenda, time without pressure. When I returned to Seattle, I felt reset in ways I hadn't known I needed. In August, 2 years after that ultrasound photo, I ran into someone I'd known in college. Her name was Melissa, and she'd been in my engineering program, smart and driven and funny in ways that had always made group projects more bearable. We'd lost touch after graduation, followed different career paths, lived separate lives. Running into her at a coffee shop near my office felt like the universe offering a do-over. We talked for an hour, exchanged numbers, made vague plans to get coffee again sometime. That sometime became the following week, then the week after that. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch into dinner, dinner into a hike where we talked about everything except dating, both of us carefully avoiding the romantic implications of spending increasing amounts of time together. She knew about my divorce in general terms, mutual friends had filled her in, but she didn't pry for details. I knew she'd been through her own relationship disasters, a broken engagement 3 years ago, time spent rebuilding herself. We were both careful, both aware that attraction and readiness weren't the same thing. By September, we'd settled into something that felt like friendship with potential. We texted daily, shared articles and memes, had inside jokes that had developed over weeks of conversation. She made me laugh in ways I hadn't laughed since before the marriage fell apart. I made her think about problems from angles she hadn't considered. It was easy, natural, the kind of connection that doesn't force itself but grows quietly when you're not watching too closely. I didn't call it dating. Neither did she. But we both knew it was heading somewhere. October brought a conversation that felt important. Melissa and I were hiking the Rattlesnake Ledge Trail, popular enough that we passed families and couples every few minutes but private enough for real talk. She asked me directly what I was afraid of, why I seemed to hold back just when things started getting close. I gave her the honest answer. I'm afraid of being wrong again, I said. Of trusting someone who's building a second life I can't see. Of missing signs that should be obvious. Of waking up one day and realizing I've been living in a lie again. She listened without interrupting, let me finish completely before responding. That's fair, she said. What Sarah did was designed to be invisible. You're not wrong for not seeing it. But David, not everyone is Sarah. Some of us are exactly who we appear to be. The question is whether you're willing to risk finding out. We hiked in silence for a while, the only sound our breathing in boots on packed earth. At the summit, looking out over Rattlesnake Lake and mountains stretching toward Canada, I said something I hadn't planned. I want to try. With you. If you're willing to be patient while I figure out how. She smiled, not the polite kind, the real kind. I'm willing, she said. But I need you to actually try, not just go through motions. If you're in, be in. If you need more time, take it. But don't halfway this. I nodded, feeling the weight and the lightness of commitment happening simultaneously. Okay, I said. I'm in. We sealed it with a kiss that felt both terrifying and exactly right, standing on a mountain with Seattle spread out below us like a promise of better things ahead. The rest of October and through November, we dated properly. Real dates, not just coffee or casual hangs. Movies and concerts and cooking dinner together at her place or mine. We met each other's friends, integrated our separate lives in small careful ways that didn't feel rushed. She was patient with my occasional retreats into caution, the moments when something triggered memories of Sarah and I pulled back instinctively. She called me on it when necessary, gave me space when that's what I needed, showed up consistently even when I was difficult. That consistency slowly eroded my fear. December brought another first. Melissa and I spent Christmas together, just the two of us, cooking an elaborate meal neither of us quite executed correctly but that tasted perfect anyway. We exchanged gifts that showed we'd been paying attention, books we'd mentioned wanting, tools for hobbies we'd recently started. It was intimate without being overwhelming, a celebration of what we were building rather than a performance for anyone else. Lying on her couch that night, watching a fire in her fireplace, I realized I felt safe in a way I hadn't since before the marriage imploded. Safe enough to start believing again. The year ended better than it had begun. 2 years after the ultrasound that had destroyed my marriage, I stood on my apartment balcony with Melissa beside me, watching fireworks celebrate a new year. She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, feeling the weight and warmth of something real. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. To choosing wisely, I added. To trusting carefully, she continued. To loving bravely, I finished. We drank to all of it, to the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing to try again anyway. When the fireworks ended and the city settled into the first moments of the new year, Melissa turned to me with a question in her eyes. Are you happy? She asked it seriously, needing a real answer. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the text message and the divorce and the slow painful reconstruction of a life I could recognize. Yes, I said. Maybe not completely yet, but getting there. She kissed me, soft and certain. That's enough, she said. We'll figure out the rest together. 3 years after that ultrasound shattered everything, I married Melissa in a small ceremony overlooking Puget Sound. Rachel stood beside her as maid of honor, Thomas beside me. No drama, no ghosts from the past, just two people who'd survived their own storms choosing each other with clear eyes. Sarah's chapter closed the day I signed those divorce papers. This new chapter? I'm writing it consciously, choosing trust earned rather than trust assumed. Some betrayals teach you what to avoid. The best ones teach you what to build toward. I built toward this, toward honest love, toward a partner who shows up. I'm finally home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.